Alright, so I'm out at McNee Ranch today in Montera. The wind is starting to pick up, so I'm going to try to work quickly. I'm working on a 16 by 20 inch panel, and I'm going to try to finish it in an hour. So here's the scene I'm looking at, obviously focusing on the dark shape of the trees, and then the distant mountains, and then hopefully incorporating the path leading into the composition. Lately I've just been approaching my paintings with an attitude of just getting out and playing and experimenting. So that's sort of the approach today, no different. And I like that approach because it takes the pressure off of me to do a good painting. And I find that it's just a more enjoyable process, but that also the results are often better as well. So I've got dark trees over here, mountains in the distance, and then maybe a path kind of coming like this. And some grass in the foreground here. There are also some shadow patterns on these distant mountains that I'd like to include, but I feel like I'm going to lose these pretty soon because the light is changing. Kind of document them quickly. These patterns are just a starting point. I can change any of this, obviously. Okay. Alright, so that is the basic idea right there. Alright, starting with a dark mixture of ultramarine blue and alizarin crimson. This is my go-to dark mixture when I want to have color in the shadows, but I don't want it to be too overwhelming. Alright, I'm going to start by putting in a few suggested tree trunks and branches. Not that I'll stick with these, but it's a good starting point. I like to put in the branches first and then add the foliage afterwards, kind of like this, so you get little bits of, you know, branches showing through. Kind of keeps it feeling spontaneous. I don't want my plants to feel too carefully planned out. It's one of the things we do, I think, as painters, is we kind of, or just as people, we like to organize things. And organizing is good around the house, but, and maybe in the studio, but not so much in a painting, or at least not over organizing. That's part of why I like to work quickly. And I'm thinking maybe another little bit of shrubbery in the shadows here. Actually, I think I'd like this to come up a little bit. Maybe more like that. Alright, I've got some titanium white and ultramarine blue for the shadows on the distant mountains. We'll get those mapped in. That shape's a little awkward. So I'm just focusing on shapes at this point. Trying to create something interesting, an interesting pattern, just using the scenery as inspiration. For the sky, I've got a mixture of titanium white, ultramarine blue, and a bit of phthalo blue as well. It's kind of my go-to mixture for skies, at least on the first pass. Ultramarine tends to be a little bit too purple for me. So I like to add the phthalo blue. There's some grass in the foreground that is about the same value as the sky, so I don't want to go too bright with the sky. I'm going to try to keep it, you know, above a mid-tone, but not too light. The other thing about going too light is I don't get as much color in the sky as I would like to. I think that's good. That's a good start right there. Just approximating colors and values at this point. Alright, so going with a pale green here for the distant mountains. This is the light portion of the mountains, and I'm paying attention to value here. I want to make sure that the distant mountains are darker than the sky, but also lighter than the trees in the foreground, because I do want to create a sense of depth. The key to working quickly and keeping it loose is to have a nice you know, structure, like shape structure, that allows you to just focus on the big shapes and not get bogged down in detail. Okay, so now working on these shadow shapes that are in the foreground. trying to keep the green somewhat transparent. I'm using ultramarine blue and a transparent yellow. All right, some more darks in here. Part of the way I keep this paint transparent is by keeping it thin and, you know, applying vigorous brush strokes, adding some darks here as well. By establishing my darks early on, I've pretty much established the composition, and then I've just got to be careful not to mess up the value pattern. The value pattern is the painting, really. It's the composition. All right, these two lines here are too parallel, so I think I want to move this one up a little bit like this, and maybe add a little bit of something else in there, something like that. That feels a little too dramatic, maybe. There we go. Okay, and then there's the light portion of the hills here. There's some lighter green here as well. And then over here it's a bit, I don't know, it's got almost like some red in it. All right, I added some titanium white, which actually cooled it off. So I'm gonna have to add back some yellow. Just focusing on values right now though, mostly. All right, so now adding in the trail. And maybe I'll have a little hint of it out in the distance here as well. For the portion of the trail that's in the shadow, I mixed in some dioxazine purple. I think I'll add some bits of purple along here as well. And maybe I'll add some purplish tones in here as well. I'm just looking for patterns that I can build upon. All right, so I feel like I want to get some reds into the painting. So I've got a sort of burnt sienna mixture here for the foreground. And I'm not really seeing anything red in this area, but that's okay. I mean, I feel like the painting needs it. So that's what it's gonna get. And then maybe a little red here too. I'm experimenting with going with pure alizarin crimson in the tree here for the trunks. Trying to darken things up a bit, but I do want to keep some color in this painting. So reinforcing the trunks. Alizarin crimson is nice because it's not overwhelming. There's some nice spontaneous shapes going on in these trees, and I don't want to lose that spontaneity. But I do need to make these shapes darker. And I might add some highlights on the branches to further define them. Just maybe some bits of blue or purple or something. But I don't mind having bits of this red showing through either. Just hints of that alizarin. It's always a challenge getting red into a landscape painting. So I always look for opportunities to include red. Oftentimes the scrubbing is really promising, and then I start building out the painting, you know, putting on thicker paint and defining things, and I ruin the painting. We've all been there. So I'm going to try not to do that today. All right, now adding in some thick strokes of dark green, but I'm still focusing on the shapes and looking for an interesting pattern. So I'm not trying to replicate the tree exactly. Again, using nature as inspiration, but not staying exactly true to what I'm seeing. And part of what inspired me to use nature as inspiration was just driving around for hours or walking around for hours looking for the perfect scene and never finding it. And often, you know, I would end up not painting that day. All right, switched over to a synthetic flat, a number 4, and I will probably build up much of the painting with this brush just because there are some small shapes in here. Adding a few little bits of light on some of these plants, but still trying to maintain the shape structure. In fact, I think I want this to be a little bit darker. All right, so I'm reinforcing some of these light areas using a cooler green. I am trying to preserve some of the warmer greens here too. All right, and adding more cool green here as well. I'll try to keep some of the initial scrubbing still visible. All right, reinforcing the darks on the shadow side of these shrubs in the foreground here. And using straight dioxazine purple. And I'm looking at the line of these darks as well. I kind of want to mess it up a little bit and make sure the shapes aren't mimicking each other. I also don't want the darks to be quite as dark as the darks over in this tree, because I don't want to draw too much attention to the foreground, so I'm keeping the values a little bit lighter. One of the challenges using a brush this size, kind of small, is that it's pretty easy to mess up the design. I know I keep saying this, but I'm just really trying to be careful not to mess up this value pattern. All right, I'm adding bits of dioxazine purple into the tree here. And it may seem kind of extreme, but once this gets indoors, it's not going to be as saturated and will be barely noticeable, so I can kind of push it. Something always to remember when you're outdoors, it's the colors seem more vibrant outdoors. When you get it inside, it's not going to be as dramatic. I'll add a few touches of purple over here as well. All right, using sort of a pinkish mixture for the portion of the trail that's in the light. Boost the value out here as well. All right, reinforcing the darks in the shadows on the mountains. And I've got 7 minutes left, so far 53 minutes. And working quickly like this is really enjoyable. I know when you're first starting out, it can be kind of stressful. So when you're starting, take as much time as you want. The key is to enjoy the process, and because if you enjoy, you'll keep painting. If you keep painting, you'll get better. It gets more and more enjoyable as time goes on. But if you've been painting for a while, it can be nice to shake things up by giving yourself a time limit. I think you'll be surprised at what you can accomplish in a short period of time. All right, adding some warmer bits on these mountains. Still paying attention to the value. I want to make sure that these warmer tones are still darker than the sky, so that I don't break up the value pattern. All right, so here's what I finished up with. This painting did take about an hour to complete, and the idea behind setting a time limit is to encourage you to loosen up and make spontaneous decisions and not overwork the painting. When painting quickly, it's important to have a simple design. So I always try to compose with strong, simple shapes and then stick to that design. One of the challenges with this painting was to create a sense of depth, being that the distant mountains were similar in color and value to the foreground. So I did push the reds in these greens in the distance, and I pushed the yellow in the greens in the foreground in order to create a sense of depth. All right, so I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think in the comments. If you'd like to see some extra videos and help support the channel, there's a Patreon link down below. It's a Patreon support that helps keep me making these videos, and it's much appreciated, so check it out. Other than that, stay creative. I'll see you guys in the next video.